This committee has under its jurisdiction the American relationship with the international financial institutions. It's been a subject in which I've long had a very strong interest, and the last time the Democrats were in power, I chose to chair the subcommittee which had jurisdiction over the international financial institutions. For much of this year, we have been dealing with some housing issues and some other domestic issues which demanded attention, but this whole set of issues involving development and particularly our moral responsibility to try to reduce poverty in the world have been very much on our mind, and we are now going to be focusing, we have already begun in this latter part of this year and next year, on development issues. And we will be dealing with such questions as debt relief. We had a hearing on the question of whether or not there are in certain World Bank documents a bias against improved social conditions for working people. We will have next year the request, I believe, for an increased allocation for the International Development Association, and we will be raising some policy concerns in conjunction with that. And we ultimately are supportive of that, many of us on the committee, but not without some policy considerations being addressed. This hearing today is on one of those subjects which is quite important, not generally well known. It is one of those that's important to discuss because it's counterintuitive. Intuition says that if a particular country is lucky enough to have physical resources that are valuable in world commerce, that's a good thing, and it certainly ought to be. There is considerable evidence that this does not in practice work out as it should be in many cases. Now, this is an area where we do not have direct policy control as we do in the subprime area or in housing or securities regulation, but the United States is a major factor in the World Bank and the regional development banks, in our own domestic, in our own bilateral foreign aid programs, and we think it is very important to focus attention on this issue, and it's important for this reason. Some problems are very difficult to resolve. Some things are intractable. If you have abject poverty and no source of revenue to alleviate it, that's a tough issue. Here we have a situation in which we are talking about countries, when we deal with this, by definition, that are potentially quite wealthy, that are wealthy as entities, that have a great source of wealth. And the question is, how do we encourage policies that make sure that this resource is a positive rather than a negative? And as I said, it's counterintuitive, and I hope that people will be paying attention as we hear from people about how this has gone bad. And it's what's both discouraging and encouraging about this issue is it's a case where people's mistakes are the problem. If you are dealing with inherent problems, that can be harder to deal with. If you are dealing with physical shortages, if you are dealing with terrible problems of climate, it's often hard to figure out how to deal with them. But when the problem is, as it is here, that human decisions are the source of the problem, and that's clearly the case. We have the resources. We have resources that, by any rational reckoning, ought to be a great boon for the people in the country in which these resources are located, but in many cases, bad public policy, i.e. lousy decisions, corrupt decisions, incompetent decisions by people in charge have had a counter effect. And our job is to try to talk about the policies that counteract that, and then, to the extent that the United States can, encourage their adoption. I would just close by saying this. This is particularly an area where this committee will be engaged in international cooperation. It is our intention to seek out members of parliaments in other countries who share our jurisdiction and our interest in fighting poverty. Several of the members are very interested in this. So this is it's still the early part, but it will become very much a part of this committee's agenda over the next year and beyond to do what we can to think about, help evolve and encourage the adoption of public policies that maximize our ability to reduce poverty. And this is one, as I said, where what ought to be a boon to people has in some cases been either neutral or, sadly, the opposite. And it's one that we think should be amenable to the kind of processes that we engage in. The gentleman from Texas wanted to make an opening statement.